Hello, welcome to CrossCurrents, produced by the City of Fort Collins in cooperation with the Larimer County League of Women Voters. I'm Barbara Rutstein, the moderator of today's program. Our topic is Underutilized Schools, Challenges and Solutions. For years, Fort Collins residents read statistics about growing numbers of students in the school district. We built many new schools to accommodate increased enrollments. We hired new teachers and provided more specialized learning experiences for our children. In November, voters approved two tax measures. One will increase funding for staffing by up to $16 million a year, and the other authorizes additional debt up to $217 million for facility upgrades. Still, we are facing the possibility of closing some schools, mainly in the northern part of the city. Parents and teachers are very concerned about how closure might impact their students' progress. The school board and the administration worry how best to manage district funds and continue to improve educational achievement. Today we will discuss how we got into this situation and what can be done to make sure that student improvement is the primary reason for making any changes. To discuss this issue, we have on my right John Lynn, a stay-at-home dad. On his right is Kevin Hahn, Assistant Superintendent of Elementary Schools. On his right is Tom Balchak, Poudre School District Board Member, and on his right is Jana Lay, a former board member and a parent. Welcome to you and to our studio and viewing audiences. To begin, perhaps we need to know what defines an underutilized school. Kevin, what guidelines were used in defining an underutilized school?
Well, before I answer that from the standpoint of the Underutilized Schools Plan, I think it might be important for us to go back into the 2007 and 2008 school year where we initially studied small schools within Poudre School District. And we analyzed what the incremental increase in costs to educate students within small settings, small environments. So with that, we analyzed it for the purpose of helping to fund our student-based budgeting model. And in that model, we have a size factor for schools that we utilize to help educate students to the level that we're interested in educating them here in Poudre School District. So that study in itself was incremental and actually seminal to the conversation around underutilized schools, because within that study we identified elementary schools at 325 students or less as that being at a critical point in which we know that it costs more money to educate students in that setting, but also at the middle school, back actually junior high level at that point in time, 600 students. So that was one of the primary lenses in which we were analyzing small schools. But beyond that too, we looked at capacity utilization as well too. We have a formula of how we identify the capacity utilization within each one of our facilities, and we came up with some research that we've done around schools that are operating under a 65% capacity rating as being underutilized. Within that formula, so too, we take offline, so to speak, in that calculation, art rooms, music rooms, the gymnasiums, things of that nature at the elementary level. But with all those things taken offline, so to speak, in that calculation, schools still operating under a 65% capacity utilization were deemed to be a component of what it means to have an underutilized school.
Okay, Tom, was that a board policy or an administration policy?
I think that's a series of processes that were undertook based upon historically what was happening in the district. And I can identify, although Kevin went back to 2007 and 2008, as I'm aware of this issue back 5-8 years as we began to see the growth in Fort Collins declining and flattening out and stabilizing. And so it's been an issue that's been around for a while, but if you remember back all the way back in 2004, when we were talking about those issues, is that they were kind of pushed aside because the economy was still doing well. And so we knew that this was something that's been in our rearview mirror for a while and something that needed to be addressed. And in order to give what Kevin said in a greater context and sense of urgency, is the realization is that those 17, for example, of 41 elementary schools that are receiving additional funding, is that's an impact of $3.4 million annually to the school district. And so when we look at the reality of what's happening on a state level, and this may be getting ahead in the discussion, but I think it's relevant to give an indication of where we are and why we're here, is I heard numbers of 1,750 million shortfall that may be affecting education, up to 1.5 billion. And so we are looking very seriously at continuing budget issues, and this is an important part of the discussion.
So you mean that was a shortfall in the state funding?
Yes, that will then have an impact.
Okay, okay. John, how would you define an underutilized school?
Well, I think that's an excellent question. I think the first thing I'd like to go to is the small school study. It was talking about grades K through 6, not K through 5, and they mentioned 325 as the onset of where you need to start looking at schools, and at 250 as being the critical number. And without going into all the numbers about the various things that Dr. Hahn mentioned, the way that a lot of these numbers have come forth, that's where our real problem as parents has been. We can't see how they got to the schools that they came up with. Looks like they went after primarily lower income schools. And I will like to preface the fact that I am the District Advisory Board representative for Irish Elementary, so I will speak to them more than the other schools, although I've worked with some of their numbers.
Okay, well, how many schools do we have that are under 325?
Well, the easy way to answer that is the numbers that I have in front of me right now. Is when I look at utilization, at the percentage of utilization, as Kevin Hahn was mentioning, they went out and they looked at the schools and they looked at the number of rooms they had. They made some extractions for computer rooms and so forth. And then from there, they said, okay, this is how many kids you have, because not all schools are the same size. And so it makes it tricky, because 325 for a newer building built at 500 or what building, so they have to make that adjustment. And with that in mind, for example, Red Feather's at 35%, Stowe Prairie 40, Moore 42, Livermore 44, Bowder 46, Beatty 55, Bethany 56, CLPE's at 56, Riffenburg's at 58%, Putnam 58, Lopez 59, Tenma 61.
You're talking about percentages.
These are
now.
Percentages of how much utilization they are currently underused.
Okay.
And see, this is where the problem comes in for these northern schools. As you see, I've only hit one northern school so far. I could mention a dozen more before I get to Irish, which is currently at 86%, for example.
86%?
86% current capacity utilization.
Okay.
Correct. And,
Okay.
and that's where, when we look at the numbers, it's difficult for us to say, say in Lopez's example, there's 19 schools less utilized than Lopez. There's 14 less than Irish that are less utilized. So if it's just about utilization, then why are these other schools not being looked at?
Okay. Jana, what's your perspective?
I'd like to throw some different concepts into this underutilized school name. What I would consider to be an underutilized school would be one that has documented declining neighborhood areas. What are the rental rates like? What are the home ownerships like? Who's living there? Has a preschool census been done to show that there are declining numbers of children in the area who will be then attending that school? Is a before-school program being utilized? Is a preschool program in the school, and what's the utilization there? The after-school programs. Are there after-school programs available, and are they being utilized by the students? What percentage of the students are staying after school in that safe place rather than going home right away till 5 or 5:30 at night? Are the parents coming for conferences, for events? Are the parents utilizing the services available at the school? Those are the kinds of things that tell me a school is utilized or it's not. And we need current data, and it's very broad-based. It's not, from my perspective, it shouldn't be just the numbers of kids in the school.
Okay, so you're looking at it more like a cultural,
more holistic,
neighborhood, sociological kind of thing.
Community.
Right. Okay, okay. Well, now, what process was used to determine the, or do you think the process used was a good one? Tom?
Well, one is I look at the process, and Kevin has identified a little bit and put it in a context going back to 2007 and 2008 through 2010. And so we did have a small school study, a facilities and feasibility study, which identified schools that were facing challenges in terms of numbers and utilization in 2009 and 2010. If you remember, we had a lot of this debate last year, and we took a step back, and there was an extensive process used to get community feedback last winter and into the early spring. In terms of identifying things from which were small school forums. At that time then, after that information was complete and analyzed, is that the board did vote to approve a resolution asking and directing the district in order to facilitate and to develop a process for addressing this issue. We voted on and approved the process and are monitoring it along the way. And then in September of 2010, 16 particular schools were identified, and we are currently in the middle of that process right now, which includes this type of public deliberation that involves the whole community.
I mean, why were some schools chosen that may have more utilization than others? I guess that's the question I'm asking, or what I don't understand.
Well, just to answer that briefly, I think there were multiple sources of input regarding how schools ended up on a particular list, and I think Kevin, I notice, has that information right at his fingertips there, so I'll let him answer that more specifically.
Okay. Because it seems to me that John is saying that some of these schools that have higher utilization were put on the list for closure, and I'm just trying to let our audience know whether you agree on his figures or your figures are different.
Well, all this data is on our website, so anyone can access this information, but we used 5 criteria basically. 1, identifying the size of school itself, and then 2, looking at the capacity utilization, as I described earlier, and then also looking at some of the information around the difference in the enrollment between the 2005 and 2008 October counts, and looking at the discrepancies between those two to get a sense of the trend line, so to speak, around the enrollment patterns within that school, as well as looking at some of our projection information as well too, and seeing if there's a 10% decline in the projected numbers of students that are slated to go to that school. We also looked at choice out information as well. As you know, within PSD, we have 31% of our students choice into schools outside of their neighborhood. So we used the criteria of areas that had more than 40% of their students in neighborhoods choicing out of that particular area or that school. So we use that as another piece of information indicating that, again, trend patterns showing what they are regarding enrollment. And then also we looked at cost efficiency, and that's related to our student-based budgeting formula, that any school that received more than 3% of a size factor within our formula, they met that criteria as well. Again, going back to the small school study where we know that it costs more to educate students in smaller settings, so we adjusted for that. So again, we can offer the quality of education that we're committed to, but schools that had more than 3%, they also met that criteria.
Tell me what that means. I read that, but I didn't understand it. The 3% and 9% and what does that describe?
What it describes is when we did the small school study, we identified the costs associated with the types of programs that we're committed to providing within PSD. The level of art, music, PE, interventions in the area of reading, the amount of staffing that it would take to offer appropriate sizes of classes at the first, second, and third grade levels, et cetera. And we built models basically around that. But then what we did is we did a cost analysis around what does it actually cost to educate students in that fashion at a variety of size schools. And what we did then is created a cost analysis curve, so to speak, in which we now have identified the incremental cost associated with educating students in smaller settings. It just costs more. The smaller the school, the higher the cost to offer those levels of programs.
Well, now, we did talk about underutilization, and I don't know if anyone in the audience has any questions about that.
Dr. Hahn, you mentioned that you used the data up until 2008 because you wanted to see what the trend would be. My question is, why then aren't we looking at the data for 2010, making the adjustments, which would be easy to do for the grade reconfiguration? But if we want to really wait to see what the trend is, why aren't we looking at current data? And it seems to me to be a huge problem. For example, in the schools that one of my children attends, Lincoln, prior to 2008, there was a decrease in enrollment, and since 2008, there's been a very steep increase and continues to be a very steep increase in enrollment.
That's why we actually looked at two pieces of information in regard to the enrollment criteria, one of them being the difference between 2005 and 2008, because we wanted to compare apples and apples. And this is prior to grade reconfiguration, so therefore it was looking at schools from a K-6 perspective at the 2005 and 2006 level. And then we also used the 2010 October count projections this year, and also looking at the projected enrollment for 12-13. And through our calculations in our planning department, we're able to come pretty close to our analysis around the projected enrollments for schools. And with that, if there's a 10% decrease in enrollment between those two figures, schools would met that criteria as well.
And my question also has to do with the criteria. You know, there is a perception among many of us who are trained in statistics that the approach and the criteria selected are actually statistically invalid. You know, that both the capacity utilization and the enrollment criteria reflect the projected enrollment drop using 2005 through 2008 data, and as such, they're so interrelated that they're actually the same criteria. And not only that, but they're entirely a reflection of the upcoming boundary changes that in effect hit especially Irish and Putnam especially hard. So not only are they essentially the same criteria, we ended up with 2 red dots associated with that. So what do you say to people who have those concerns?
Again, I think what we were looking at is what are the data points that we have that would indicate schools that are the most underutilized within PSD. And we used these figures based on, again, projections being what they are, projections, but understanding that within our calculations, we've been pretty right on with those data points in the past. So with that, again, it's looking at enrollment patterns. Yes, we do have boundary changes coming up, which were to help address some of the imbalance of enrollment within schools. But again, we have pretty solid numbers around our projections at this point.
Yes, I have a son that goes to Lopez Elementary. Kevin, my question would be, in using the data that you guys used from 2005 through 2008, at Lopez Elementary, for example, we did not agree with the data. We brought that to your attention, and they found anomalies within that data. However, they did not go through and re-examine that data for the other schools, even after finding the anomalies with our data. My question would be is if you found that there was a mistake in the data that was used and that is accurate because you had to change the data, why was that study then not reproduced for the other schools to ensure that the data was accurate for those schools as well?
One piece in regard to Lopez numbers is we had a concern expressed around the enrollment patterns as indicated in our data points. And with our projected enrollment calculations, we work with our administrators regarding those calculations to get a sense from them, is this reflecting what they're seeing in reality? And they give us feedback around that, and that process was utilized. And with that, there was a decision made to reduce some of the calculations at the kindergarten level at Lopez for our October count. And that was done in collaboration with our administrators, an administrator at the building, but then also too, if we were to look just at the October count information and actually the October projections and the October count, they still would meet that criterion of more than a 10% decline with the projected enrollment within that area. So while there was a question about the anomaly within the data, we did the investigation around that and recalculate the information, and also talk to our demographer as well to substantiate that information.
Okay, and Tom, could the board decide that they didn't want to use information from 2005 and then decide that maybe the information would be better for the last 3 years rather than the last 5 years, or changing it? Is that a board policy? Who would decide that?
Well, let me answer it this way, is that I'm not a statistician myself, but I do trust the history of what has been done in this district regarding data since I've lived here in 1980. In this particular process is obviously we're concerned with the reliability of the data, but it's not the superintendent's and the board's responsibility to gather the data. That has been delegated to this group who is gathering the data, but it certainly is our responsibility to evaluate it. Okay, and that is simply a role distinction that I think has to be made. An interesting point related to the data too that hasn't been mentioned, that may be mentioned as you ask further questions, is the unknown quantity of how many parents and families within the district are going to use their prerogative of choice. And
yes, we'll get to that.
We've heard the 31% mentioned before, and some people even say that that's higher. So you have to deal with the numbers that you have. Certainly, if particularly in trying to have a transparent process, you want other people looking at the data, and you want them informing and pointing out things specifically as they relate to the individual school. So the short answer is, yeah, absolutely we'll be evaluating and looking at that data before making any decisions.
And who did gather the data? Was it an outside group, or where did the data come from?
It was our staff, PSD staff, that we have
okay.
internally.
Okay. And do you have some problem with the gathering of the data?
Oh boy, yes, I certainly
Okay.
do. To begin with, I should say that all the data that I used tonight came directly from PSD's website. When I mentioned the student enrollment, you can look these up online, probably go by color when you look at it. That's the capacity in 2010. The elementary boundary data they mentioned, the biggest problem that I have with it and all the schools that ended up on this list is that when you look at the supporting criteria, 4 of the points are based on these projections. And the one thing, and when you dig deep enough and you look hard enough, is that they left off this extra column on their projections, and that's the column that puts the school of choice back into it. If you look at this data and you see Irish, you see 255. But you look over here where the pink circle is, you see 303. But if you want to believe that their data number is correct and that they didn't overbuild schools based on these similar projections and that they moved kids out of 6th grade and forward out of the elementary schools, based on all that, still, they had a draft proposal of a 5-year projections, and this was what they paid an independent company to come up with. And you look at those projections, for example, and they show Irish at 333 for the base year that they're using for their data. So none of their data, if you use it correctly off their website, line up to put these on, except the simple fact is that when they looked at boundaries, they're pulling kids out of some of the schools. But they don't count school of choice back into it. They only count choice out. And if you look at Lopez, for example, they've got just as many choice in as they do choice out. And I thought that we were supposed to be embracing school of choice. And if we embrace it, then why does the fact that you decide to drive your kid to school is more important or less important than whether your kid walks across the street to their neighborhood school?
I have a question regarding projections. Those of us who follow local city politics know that the Mountain Vista Sub-Area Plan was approved last year, and that's 1,700 homes from Anheuser-Busch to the Alta Vista neighborhood. In addition to that, there's a current project open right now in between LaPorte and Vine, west of Taft Hill Road. That's 125 dwelling units. And when I was talking to city staff about this, I asked them, city planners, I asked them if they had had any conversations with the district about current plans, such as the one in between Vine and LaPorte, and how that might affect projected enrollment. So I'm wondering if you looked at your projections, how you could have accurately done that without looking at current, current development projects that are open, because that's going to impact Irish and Lincoln and Putnam significantly.
The only response I have to that is that we're constantly working with our demographer, who also analyzes this information and informs us of information such as this to help with our calculations and within our thinking around our projected enrollment. So we're in contact with him quite often around those issues, and he provides great information for us around those types of items.
Okay, let's go on. One of the questions, or one of the things that I read, and I don't know if my statistics are right, is that we have 4,500 empty seats. Is that correct or incorrect? And does anyone know?
The data that we've been using is 4,100, and that information has been within some of our PowerPoint presentations and information that we've been sharing going back to the small schools forums last year. And that's with the calculations, as I was describing with our capacity utilization, taking certain classrooms offline, so to speak, out of those calculations.
Okay, now then my next question is, if that's right, how did we get to 4,500 extra seats? If everybody was doing their job, guessing, I guess, it's a guessing job, 4,500 seems like a huge number. And do we know how we got there? Jana, you have some experience, I guess, with that.
Well, I heard John mentioned overbuilding. And the fact of the matter is, well, I don't believe we overbuilt. Not with the information we had at the time. And we worked really hard. The board and the administration worked really hard over many years to attempt to keep up with the number of kids who were in this district. And for many years in the 80s, there weren't enough spaces available for all the kids. So buildings were being built. There was a bond issue passed in 2000 that would provide for several more schools. Through the efficient use of that money, the district was able to build a couple of more elementary schools. Those elementary schools went to a couple of our outlying communities. One of the things that I think is critical is that Poudre School District is a very geographically large district, and it is the responsibility of them to take care of the kids throughout that huge geographic area. If the district were not to provide schools within the communities that are included in our district, I think we would then be harming their economic development. It would be harming their abilities to be their own communities, to grow, to get larger, bring in businesses, things like that. But I don't think we overbuilt. We were building for our projections. And then I don't think anybody predicted the downturn. And I don't think anybody predicted that couple of the large companies would suddenly close down parts of their businesses and head things overseas and whatnot. There were times when all of a sudden kids disappeared overnight because of the layoffs in town. But, you know, with the number of seats that are available, they also aren't, some have said, well, close down just a certain number of schools and it'll all take care of itself. But I would be really surprised if the number of seats are equal K through 5. And that's another thing that we need to consider when we talk about school closures is how do we fit in those kids in the available seats? It isn't all equal. Right. The exact number of kindergartners and first graders and second graders.
Of course. And what about boundary changes? How does that impact it? Did you have something you wanted to mention, Tom?
Yeah, and I'll tie it into your most recent question, and that is, even though I wasn't on the board in 2004, is that I do remember being in the town, and that enrollment growth, as Jana has identified, was in the outlying areas of Wellington, Timnath, and more recently in the southeast. The economy was good, and what happened at that particular time is there was talk of not building more schools. The community priority expressed at that time was that we do not want our kids bused. We would prefer to have schools within our neighborhood communities, and that was a value that was expressed, and it was followed by the board at that time. And considering that the economy was good, as you can see how that was a logical conclusion.
Okay. Now, where do boundary changes fit into this?
Well, if I could address what Tom said, I agree with him that they deserve their neighborhood school just as much as my kids deserve their neighborhood school. And if you look at the numbers, Jana, you know, and I've got them right here, it's elementary student count by history. When those two schools were built in the 10 years from 1997 to 2007, we lost 100 students. We're in a 5-year decline when those schools were built. And so there's nothing that supports that during a 5-year decline you would go ahead and build it, despite of how long you thought you needed these schools. But the net result is if schools deserve to have a neighborhood component, then the outlying schools should understand that we deserve to have a neighborhood component too. They were left off this list. They were given the magic green dot, is what I call it, on their plan. For some reason, even though most of those outlying schools that were newly built are still at less than 50% capacity, they aren't even in consideration for closing. And so if you were to look at it as a statistician might, you go, okay, for whatever reason we built these schools, we have that problem. Maybe we need to go back, step back and say, maybe it was too soon. Maybe if we're going to close schools, we should close the schools that are truly most utilized, and we deserve a neighborhood school just as well.
I'm not disagreeing with you.
Thank you.
What about boundary changes? How does that affect the enrollment? And would boundary changes have any effect?
We know that with boundary changes alone, that would still not address the underutilized nature of our schools. We are looking at changing the boundaries and have actually approved them and moving forward with them. And then basically it was to help with making sure that we have that the non-contiguous boundaries that we currently have are now contiguous. We're currently busing students past other elementary schools to go to another elementary school. And it's the idea that we wanted to make sure that we have contiguous boundaries, that we're balancing enrollment as much as possible, and also helping to align the feeder systems for middle schools. So those three premises were the driving force behind looking at boundaries. But even with shifting boundaries, we still have many, many open seats.
Okay. Are there any schools that are filled to capacity or over-enrolled?
Absolutely. Out in our southeast area, in some cases, absolutely, we have schools such as Zach Elementary School very much at capacity.
Oh, okay, okay. Now, where did the realignment of grades feed into this problem?
Could I address something Dr. Hahn just got through saying?
Sure.
The first charge of that boundary committee, if you read the boundary report, when they did their final report, was to balance enrollment. And this is a major concern we have, especially at Irish, because we have a bilingual program. But yet, with balancing enrollment, and that's where the projections, that's the only reason we made it on the list. They take away 130 kids, and they don't put them back. They go to the outlying schools. If you look where they're going to CLPE and other schools. In the net shuffling of the deck, none of the cards came back to Irish. And the other thing is when you change those enrollments, and especially with the at-risk kids that we have here, is that you pull them out of programs that they're comfortable with and that they're achieving. And that was one of the first things that Tom Balchak mentioned earlier, is their request of the administration was to go forth and look into this, but they mentioned achievement 4 different times during there, but that is not being looked at.
Okay, okay. And so boundary changes wouldn't do it. What effect did realignment of grades have?
Well, in many ways, the way we talk about it is that we've created 4-year comprehensive high schools, making our high schools definitely more efficient and programmatically more efficient for students. Some would say we made the elementaries a little bit more inefficient because we've taken a grade level and moved them up to the middle school level. But regardless, we would still have this situation no matter if we had the current numbers of students. We just kind of shifted some of them to the high school level and a 6th grade class to the middle level. We still would have comparable seats available in the district.
Okay, now what about school of choice? Someone needs to explain how we can have 31 or possibly 48% of the students leaving their neighborhood school when neighborhood schools are supposed to be the backbone of American public education. Who would like to tackle that?
I'd be happy to start. That's actually a state law, school of choice. There really isn't much choice in a district to not do that, unless their schools are absolutely full. If there's room at a school, space is available, then a parent can choose to take their children to fill up that seat. The school of choice difficulties started a number of years ago. I think it was before I was on the board that law was put into place. I was on the boundary committee for 13 years. And it started to become more of a problem to make boundary changes because of the number of kids who were choicing in and out of schools. So that's one of the problems with the decision to use just a choice out data, I think, for some of the underutilized schools, because many times it's a wash. or pretty close to it, the number of kids choicing out and the number of kids choicing in. Living in the northwest section of town, I also know that there are a lot of different reasons why people choice their children out of an area. It could be because of where they work. They want their kids closer. It could be for educational program. And the unfortunate reality in the northwest section of town is there is also white flight. There are parents choicing their kids out of the area because of the diversity that's there. And they would rather not have their children in that.
Okay.
So it isn't a good criteria just using the choice out, in my view, because areas of town have different reasons for choice.
And Tom, does the board have the option to say choice is fine, but we have a higher reason for limiting it to 10% or 15% rather than whatever is available?
The statistics haven't been limited to 31%. They are based on the individual desires of parents and families. And we live in a society and culture that values choice as very important. And it's something that I agree with. And it's something that I think when you look at, for example, the beginnings of the charter movement, of people for one reason or another who are not satisfied with the choices they had within the public schools. And so what you see is not only people choosing for some of the variety of reasons that were identified, but also for particular curriculums, whether they be Hearst Core IB or ones with a classical emphasis. And the folks most responsible for the education of children are first and foremost are the parents. And now the dilemma comes in is, which I believe that you're alluding to, particularly in difficult economic times, is that the reality is that choice cost and who pays. And it's very important to remember that as we attempt to balance not only individual choices, but how they affect neighborhood schools and how they affect the overall budget.
But could the school board, if it wanted, have a policy that says we will only allow this much choice, or if it's going to change or close a school, then we won't allow it? Is that a possibility or not?
Because the reality of choice extends beyond school district boundaries. And really what Jana identified too, and some people might not have picked up with, is that someone who lives in Fort Collins is you can have your child go to any school in the entire state if there's room. And so I believe where the district and the school board in particular has some parameters is around maintaining exclusive chartering authority for a district, and then making a decision about limiting or expanding those choices based upon those charter applications.
Okay, Kevin?
One more component to that would be that by law and per our policy, if we have the space and programs available, we do need to allow that choice to occur.
So any percentage, it could be 100% of the people choosing and everybody's running around town. That would be good, actually, because then you wouldn't have to bus.
Well, I think our figures are also impacted by, we have some schools that are 100% choice or as well. We have some elementary schools that are 100% choice, as well as a middle school as well. And then programmatically, we have people choosing IB programs, things of that nature too. So some of it's also, the 31% is also influenced by some 100% choice schools as well.
Let me just make one more point related to choice that I think is important in the context of this discussion. And although we oftentimes think of choice as the people who are choicing out of schools, the reality is we have a much larger majority of people who are choosing their neighborhood schools as school of choice. And that value of them making that choice is equal to the choices that other people are making.
Okay, John?
And I'd like to say that the district does support school of choice. They gave the magic green dot for non-consideration for a school closure for district-supported schools of choice. So Harris Bilingual, Lab School, and Polaris aren't even considered for closure because they're district-supported school of choice. So it makes these other schools, even though they make these magic red versus green dots, and it makes them look like they're less important to the other schools, because if it's a district-supported school of choice, they're simply not under consideration. And that's what I'd like to understand, is how how those schools got the magic green dot to not be even looked at as a school that could be closed, when all three of them are less utilized than the schools that are on this list.
Yeah, I'd be glad to answer that. And I think, first of all, you make a very good, legitimate, and important point. And this is an issue that the board talked about and debated. But when we established those schools, which was done with another board, it was with the understanding that those folks came forward and took advantage of creating an opportunity that took a lot of blood, sweat, and tears in order to make that happen. And at this particular time, with this particular board, is that we felt that we were not going to pull the rug out from under the commitment that we had made at that time.
Yes, hi, my name's Chad again, and I hate to get off topic. I just want to go back just briefly to where we had talked about underutilization again and see if I can challenge excuse me, Kevin, and see if you can maybe answer a question. Has the school district, currently in the research I've done, there is no state sort of requirements or state measurable standards for determining capacity utilization by district. It's currently left to the individual school districts to determine capacity utilization. When I've done the research and looking at other school districts, so similar in size to ours, similar in geographic distinction to ours, it looks as if, to challenge the notion that we are underutilized, we have, with the number of empty seats that we have, about 86% utilization in our district. When you look at other districts that are similar in size, they actually have less than that in terms of percentage of utilization from the ones that we've researched so far. Has the district looked at all into how we measure compared to other districts within the state when it comes to capacity or pupil utilization within our district? Because from the research I've done, it shows that we are actually more utilized as a district than the Colorado Springs School District, the Thompson School District, the Mesa School Districts, those that are similar in size and geographic region to our own.
We did look at other studies as well, and some of it's outlined within the Underutilized Schools Plan, as some of the references in the studies that we referred to. But what you're right, the school districts have to then determine, and we used kind of industry standards, so to speak, but also other best practices from other districts, looking at, again, how do you take offline certain programs, like your art classroom, your music classroom, since those aren't housed students all the time, but kids are rotating through those stations, so to speak. But we did use our calculations and do the research, and again, we're looking at under 65% utilization in our facilities. So we thought we were pretty lenient still around this, this measure around what it means to be utilizing your facility effectively. Anything above 65% did not meet that particular criterion, but anything under 65% did. So we thought we were still pretty lenient in that regard.
Yeah, I'm a Beatty parent, and we have a preschool, and we have 41 on the waiting list right now. We also have Title I, which many of the schools have. We're both Title I and preschool given a 0 on utilization. And if Title I was given a 0, doesn't that penalize the lower income schools? And the preschools, what's bad about having a lot of kids in your area coming to your school? Why would that be a negative? That would be a 0 if I'm understanding how we were credited.
Yeah, we actually took the early childhood classrooms out of the calculation for utilization. So we took early childhood out, just like we did the art, music, PE, or the gymnasiums, cafeterias, those types of things. And library, media, computer labs, all that is taken out of the calculation. And even with those taken out of the calculation, schools that were under 65% utilization received or met that criterion. Title I was different because many schools have Title I within smaller spaces. It doesn't necessarily take an entire classroom to provide Title I services, depending on the delivery model. So therefore, Title I was not part of that not taken out of the calculation.
Okay, then I guess what I don't understand is if they have 41 in a preschool, can you assume, or we assume, that those 41 children will go to that school? So it seems to me then they ought to be in the calculation, not out of it.
Yeah, not necessarily. Many of our students that attend our early childhood classrooms do not necessarily all go to that elementary school.
It's not necessarily a neighborhood
program. Not necessarily, right.
Okay, John?
Well, I'd like to dispute that, obviously. At Irish, we have 78 in our pre-K school. They took out 3 rooms, which is 25 capacity. But the thing is, those 25 per room times 3 are 100%. So if you actually aggregate those back into the numbers, it takes us from 76% to 87%. because those rooms are being utilized and they're being paid for by school dollars. And we talk about all the innovations and better ways to use these schools, but then we take out if you've got an early childhood program. And that's an excellent use of our schools. It's an education funding. It's not like we're renting it out to a massage parlor. These are good uses for these schools.
Do you know if those children are neighborhood children, or are they from all over the district too?
I don't know the entire district. Speaking to Irish, we've got a lot of Spanish-speaking children, and we take them in the preschool era, and that helps them come into the bilingual program ready to learn. They're in the same building, they're used to it. And a lot of the problems that Jana was mentioning earlier about school of choice is once a child starts the school, they generally tend to stay there. The parents get to know the teachers, the principal, etc. And so that's why the early childhood is so important to these schools. It helps build that neighborhood and that community. So yes, we've seen that most of our kids do tend to stay.
I would like to add on to that, you know, putting the early childhood in the schools was a board decision. And one of the reasons, excuse me, that we supported that concept was to offer an opportunity for neighborhood families to connect with their neighborhood schools earlier. It's an important concept.
Mm-hmm. Yes, go ahead.
To piggyback off of John's example, those 3 classrooms have been taken out of the calculation. So even with those classrooms being considered utilized, or those facilities are being utilized, it's that perspective that once you take those offline in the calculation, the rest of the building is still under 65% utilization.
But he says it's 87% or 70-something.
Well, the difference is, Dr. Hahn, you're not saying projected. The current utilization today, this year, the 2009 October count, is the numbers that we're using. These are real people that are here. We brought to the school board our school of choice forms showing that we have 377 next year. So your projections are worthless because we have real numbers. Projections got us into this trouble by building too many schools. Your projections are skewed and they just simply don't line up. I showed you a minute ago using your own data for the 2005 to 2015 data that your projections were to be much higher than what you've actually put on paper here. These projections are skewed, they're misleading, and they were very targeted to aim at these schools. If it wasn't, why, and I would dare anyone to give me a good reason, why do we have as additional supporting data percentage of free and reduced lunch? What does that have to do with utilization of a school? Why do we count free and reduced lunch as a supporting criteria?
That sheet is just additional data about the characteristics of the school and then the characteristics of populations that the school serves. That's all.
Okay. And another
it's
question.
Not in the criteria.
Yeah, I guess to tie it back a bit into the school of choice issue, my name is Stacy, by the way, and I have a 4th grader at Putnam. And a quick aside, our early childhood program is neighborhood based, and those kids will, the vast majority of them, I think over 80% of them, will funnel into Putnam and our siblings of other students there. And as far as school of choice goes, my daughter's a 4th grader. Next year's her last year. We live half a block from Putnam. She currently walks. If Putnam were to close, the next nearest school to us is Dunn, which is over capacity. From then on, there's the lab school or Harris, which are both also at capacity. So I guess I would like to know, as a parent of a child at a school that could potentially close, if one of these schools is closed, will those families get priority in choicing into another school so that we could choose then the next closest school to us? And then what does that do to the school of choice for everybody else? Dunn is over capacity, but it is geographically the closest school to Putnam, and it would make the most sense to send about 200 of our students there, but I think that's going to cause a lot of upset to parents who currently choice into Dunn or who to whom it is the neighborhood school.
Who can answer that?
Well, I think in regard to the idea of if a school were to close, one of the things that we know we would have to do is bus students to another school location, perhaps. I think that's also one of the ideas that we looked at around making sure that we have contiguous boundaries so that we get a sense of students that are in a particular geographic area, what are some of the closest schools to them as far as attendance. We know that a lot of the space that we have is in the north area as far as our schools, so that'll be something, and again, there hasn't been any decisions, any recommendations at all yet made to the Board of Education. We're still in the process of analyzing information, but the idea would be there would be some busing potentially. As far as any more priority around school of choice, we'd be following our school of choice policy and guidelines.
Tom?
Yeah, just to follow up, and I think, first of all, Stacy, thank you for your question. And she is getting to a question I think we're going to address a little bit later on, number 4, but since she brought it up, it deserves to be addressed, and that is what will be the effect if schools are closed. And what Stacy begins to identify is if any decisions are made along these lines is that there needs to be a sensitivity and a process and a concern for those folks who are going to be affected. And at least speaking as one individual board member, is that will be an extremely important component of what happens once decisions are made.
Okay. Now, I wanted to get to another question is, why are underutilized schools such a problem? Is it a money problem or is it an achievement problem? And I don't know who can tackle that one.
This has mostly been analyzed from a standpoint of facility and underutilizations of facilities. Again, going back to what Director Balchak was talking about with our small school size factor, we are spending millions of dollars to educate students in small schools, and we subsidize them accordingly. Taking the financial realities that the district's looking at, we have to constantly look at efficiencies and effectiveness as well. So we're, it's part of the conversation, part of the thinking. We also know too, as we experience within the Moore and Bowder consolidation, the level of programming, the support services that are available to kids, the enrichment opportunities, the sharing of workload of teachers, quite frankly, in regard to the amount of time and energy they can put into certain enrichment opportunities, or if they're going to be the sponsor of the student council or offer an enrichment program of some sort. They're not trying to do 2 or 3 other things while they're trying to also teach their classroom effectively. They're able to focus. We're hearing a lot of positives around that. Parent involvement and the diversity and the richness of a school setting that has come together in the Moore Bowder consolidation. We're hearing so many more positives about what's possible for students when we're educating them with more resources at a particular site than when we're trying to spread resources very thinly in small settings.
Tom?
Yeah, let me just follow up on that. Is when we're in serious discussions like this, we are dealing with some fundamental issues as they relate to living in a democracy. And those are competing values of efficiency and prosperity with neighborhood and community. And that's part of the dilemma of this, and that's part of the criteria that I'll use as I go about making decisions as an individual board member. And it is important in this context too, since I'm the only board member here, is that I am speaking as an individual, and that my views may or may not represent the rest of the board. And the board only speaks as a voice in a couple different areas. One is when we vote on policy, and one is when we vote on agenda action items, which this will be. Well, let me talk a little bit about this more from both a personal and a professional level, since I did spend 33 years of my life in public education. And I've had an opportunity to speak to a number of administrators lately. And in some of the schools that we're talking about, administrators are using such words as taxing and grueling to describe the situation that they faced in recent years. And they describe it as a compounding weariness to the staff, and all these people with declining resources have assumed more responsibilities. They've had larger class sizes, additional supervision, multi-committee assignments, making it even difficult in some instances for principals to adhere to the negotiated contract.
Now, wait, are these are the underutilized schools?
Yes. Yeah, these
it
are.
Would seem to me they would have smaller student bodies, so the teachers would have smaller classes rather than larger. Explain that.
And I think the oxymoronic answer to that is that because staffing is based on the number of pupils that you have, is that a small school physically doesn't necessarily equate with small class sizes, and so it has to do with FTEs. But in addition to that, they talk about reduced services to students in the areas of art, music, PE, and support in the areas of media and counseling. And so I think in this discussion, it's important to recognize that. And I'll give a quote from a piece of literature that I believe is referenced on the district website, and it has to do with best practices and puts how difficult this decision is in terms of context too. And that is, reads, a decision not to close a school amid circumstances of declining enrollment and economic necessity can be imprudent. And while the immediate effects may be painful, is that we do have to consider that the long-term effects may be beneficial.
Okay. How would you answer that?
In 10 minutes or less?
Yes.
First, Tom, if these criteria and the same criteria that Dr. Hahn brings forth, if they were important, I've been through this data time and time again. They're not in here. The achievement's not in there. How the school works, whether there's after-school programs, none of it's in there. And you talk about, the financial effects. No one's brought up the fact of the 21st Century Grant. And if you close Irish Putnam and Lincoln, that grant goes away. And that's $2.4 million, a lot more than the best projections that you can come up with. And then the other thing is that makes the assumption that larger schools can better serve the population. And that has been also looked at, and it can very easily be disputed. And especially when you talk about you're dispersing large portions of free and reduced lunch and Hispanic people. And when you disperse them into the other title schools, like we have out there, the ELA subtractive type programs, they are not performing nowhere near as well as the schools that are on the list. I mean, those schools are some of your best schools. Irish Elementary has the second best individual student growth per year in the entire district. It should be held up as an example. And Lopez is doing an amazing job. But again, none of that made it into the criteria. You say you're going to make that look, and you're going to give it a look as far as a chance to look at where kids are going to go, what choices you'll have, but the decision's made on the 25th, and on the 28th, the parents have to decide where their kids are going to go. And if it's not predetermined, it took 2 years to do boundaries last time. There's no way you can do it in a week or 2 days.
Okay, I think we have another question. Do you have a question? Yeah,
yes, I do.
Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Ann. I want to go back to busing for a minute. I'm wondering if there are any budgetary projections on what it's going to cost the district to bus these kids should 5 schools close.
Yeah, and that actually ties into a little bit of what John was talking about as well. The transportation costs and also the programmatic analysis, achievement analysis will also be done as part of this process. It's just not part of the criteria for underutilized schools. This was an underutilized schools plan. We know that as a cabinet and the superintendent will be looking at the elements that John's referring to around programmatic considerations and also transportation costs. We'll also be looking at things from a human resource perspective as well. But all that work will be done at the next level in this process. But absolutely, the transportation costs will be part of that analysis.
And so a question.
Costs in general.
And so I would have a question then. If you were to close a school, would the parents decide where they want them to go, and then the school district would bus them wherever the parents decided? Or would you say, I don't know the enrollment of Irish, but are there 300 students? I think you said 330.
We have 377, not including the 78 that are pre-K.
Okay, so 378 would all go to one school, or they would go to 5 schools?
Actually, a lot of that is detailed within the plans that the schools have developed. So with that, they have identified what areas of their boundaries and where the students potentially might go. They've kind of done some analysis around that and held conversations with their communities and staffs around that. So that's all within their plans that are also on the website right now.
Okay. Okay, Jana?
You know, there's a part of the school closure plans that were out there that ultimately have not been addressed. And it's a big concern of mine and has been for the whole time I've lived on the northwest side of town. If you take kids out of their neighborhood, one of the things we know for a fact is that parent and family support is critical to a child's educational success. For those families who are in the greatest stress and need and risk, can they travel those miles, those extra miles, to get to the parent-teacher conferences? Can they get to the events? Will they be able to have the wraparound services for the families to support them giving their kids support? to make them success in their educational endeavors. And I think that's one of the problems, that it's a societal problem. It's not something that is always addressed in these kind of plans, but it's an issue, and it's going to get very big if these schools on the north side, if those ones are closed, because that's a problem particular to that area. It's not a problem particular to some of the other areas of town where people are very mobile in the first place and more two-parent households and things like that. To give an example of the difficulties in the northwest side of town, when my oldest son was in first grade at Putnam Elementary, first grade teacher told me that his class was almost all oldest and only kids in the families. All except one were from a two-parent household. When she retired a few years ago from Putnam Elementary, it was exactly the opposite. There was one child in her classroom from a two-parent household. All the other kids were from families that they may be with a single parent. Many of them had at least one parent in jail. Many of them were with another guardian, not one of their parents. These are families that can't make those kinds of moves. These are families that need the extra support. These are kids that need the extra support. These kids are at school longer than kids in other schools because school is the safe place for them to be.
Okay, and how can the district do that? How can they address those concerns? Tom?
Well, I think Kevin mentioned it, and John, you and I have had this conversation before, and you know that from my perspective, that a context to inform any recommendations must include those areas that you're talking about. And so one of the things that we know is once those recommendations are made is there's going to be a deliberative process by the board in which we'll continue to get feedback and perspective from parents who are involved in those schools. And so it would, you know, it would be imprudent to make any decision without those considerations taking place. And just to mention too, since I see some of those folks in the audience, thank you for sending information related to this issue in terms of research, and the folks we have who have come from CSU, and that I read all of it, and that I search out additional information. And I would say, knowing my other colleagues on the board, that they're doing the same thing also.
Okay, do we have any more questions? Okay, there are a few more. Go ahead.
I'm Ms. Harrison. I'm a community member. I'd like to ask, how can you begin to think outside the box in terms of what do we do in our neighborhood schools between 3 p.m. and 8 a.m.? And how can we begin to look at wraparound services? And if we look at the 21st century grants and what Irish and Putnam are already starting to do around those kinds of wraparound services, how could we begin to expand that, particularly in the schools on the north side, so that we don't close those schools? Rather, we have really a community school side with wraparound services. How could we begin to do that?
Partly, I think you're right. Some of that is happening with the 21st century grants as well. And tying back to something Janice said too, this was actually part of the conversation a little bit too around the boundaries, because right now we are moving students from other areas past other elementary schools to go to a particular school, just for the reasons that Janet was alluding to around parents having a hard time to get to those schools, things of that nature. Those are some of the considerations around why does it benefit students to go to a neighborhood school, truly a neighborhood school in an area that's in close proximity to them. But around the wraparound services, I think a lot of our schools are looking more and more into that, and partnering with other groups and other agencies around support services. Boys and Girls Club have been a great partner around those types of services. But how do we keep expanding and thinking about partnering with others around those endeavors? I think it's a conversation that we're continually having, and many that you'll actually see within the innovation and efficiencies plans as well, which these schools also have developed.
Okay, another question from the audience.
Yes, my name is Brenda. I have been living in this community for 25 years. I have working with the North Side community areas and serving all the schools. My question is, is casualty or is coincidence that the 5 schools for closing are the same 5 schools that are having the highest low-income students? It's something I had the question, and I going back to related with the choice schools. I have been working with these families. These families don't have any choice. These families doesn't have any opportunity. These families don't have any transportation, even food to take home. And I said, it's only these 5 schools in the north that are the target. Why we choose another school at the south, where we don't choose? Something that the school district has to work in this.
Okay, anybody want to comment? Can we answer those questions?
Well, again, the only piece I could add is that we identified the most underutilized schools. It wasn't targeting certain areas of town, things like that, and that's why, again, we have Lopez and Beatty also schools that are very
Midtown,
underutilized
maybe.
as well. So,
And you disagree, I know, go ahead.
Oh, yeah, you know I do. If you would, Kevin, if we stick to the facts, either say projected underutilization or say not currently underutilized, because most of these schools that are on the list are not underutilized this week, today, this year. And they're projected based on false projections, numbers that have been dropped off the list. And the bottom line is, when you talk about considering all these other factors about how schools use, what services are they providing, what else are they doing for the community, you're not considering it until after you've already narrowed it down to the 5 schools with the lowest socioeconomic areas in their schools. The 3 in the north are the lowest in the whole school district, and Beatty and Lopez are the lowest socioeconomic classes in their feeder system. Quite simply, the lower economic people in this situation were targeted for closure. They're the only ones that were considered for closure. So if you want to talk about utilization, open the process up, have everybody make efficiency plans, have everybody look at their utilization today, tomorrow, and next year.
Okay, I want to get to this Katie report. This is the Comprehensive Appraisal for District Improvement Report. And it said that the gap between the largely white, more affluent students and Hispanic and lower income students is greater in the Poudre district than in similar districts statewide. My question is, how will closing any of these schools reduce the gap?
Well, first, let me answer this young lady's question another way.
Okay, and I think we can get into this in the same way.
And I think what you're really asking is, which is a very deep and fundamental question, and that is, to what extent do we have a moral obligation to serve our neediest students regardless of zip code? And it's a very high moral obligation. And I'll probably let Kevin answer the question related to achievement, since he's more familiar with that, although I do have some opinions in that area.
Okay, how would moving these students reduce the gap?
well, the one piece we do know about how to close the achievement gaps is that we know that it's about instruction, quality instruction. And we know that we have schools that are highly effective in educating different groups of students and getting results with them. We're sharing best practices with one another and learning from one another regarding those practices. We also are reflecting on research too that indicates a variety of things around schools of high poverty that have been very successful in closing the achievement gap. We also know that there's schools too in other studies where they show that students who are in more mixed SES socioeconomic status environments, that they also do well as far as their performance. So I think, again, it's digging into the research around that, but I think, if anything, it's also looking at our local environment and our local talent and expertise of our staffs and the assets that our community brings to this conversation, and looking at how we can best support students' achievement.
And so have we seen any of this in Poudre R1? Because I think something I read said that Irish has the highest increase in achievement, I think, in the last year or two. By some measures, they've done a really nice job on the growth of students. Yeah. And so it seems to me that you would also need to show that these students would do as well or better in another school. And I don't know if that exists. I mean, if that information exists.
If I could take that. The Katie report specifically says that some schools on the closure list are outperforming the district when it comes to achievement among historically underserved and at-risk populations, and that these schools should be used as models for best practice within the district to address achievement gaps. And so quite simply, the Katie report says that the schools that are on the closure list are some of the highest performing schools in this district.
Okay,
And
another
in
question?
the state as well.
If I can just add one thing.
Sure.
Again, we'll be looking at the data and indicating that, and showing that there are certain growth targets that certain schools have met, and there's also a distinction between growth and also achievement levels as far as proficiency levels. But again, it's just digging into the data more. But there are some indicators that are saying that some schools have been very successful with growth of students.
Okay, next question.
Yes, Tracy, and I'm a parent of an Irish student, actually the parent of 2 students who have been at Irish, and very familiar with our performance data, actually. And we at Irish outperform the district average on all of those indicators. Also, I'd like to go back to a comment about the wraparound services that our school provides and the changes to the district busing policies that have been implemented over the last 3 years. It actually looks like Irish has been targeted for the last 3 to 4 years for closure by changes in busing policies and attendance boundaries. In fact, we lost 45 students that lived closer to Johnson but were coming to Irish because we could meet their needs and meet the needs of their parents. And we had huge attendance at our school council during those years. Those students were transferred to Johnson, and a number of those parents have made the sacrifice to start choicing back into Irish because their students are falling through the cracks. And in fact, those boundaries have changed so frequently that in 4 school years, those students are going to have attended 3 different schools. Now, if our mandate in this district is to serve every child every day, how do those decisions support that mandate?
The situation that Tracy's alluding to regarding students from Johnson who were at one time bused to Irish, again, is kind of indicative of that idea that we've been busing kids past other elementary schools to go to certain schools. Johnson has an ELA, English Language Acquisition Program at the school. A decision was made that we can serve the students in their neighborhood school. So we, again, this idea around not busing kids past other elementaries to another elementary school was made. Again, help with efficiencies and cost efficiencies, but also to, when we have the services available in our neighborhood schools, having kids enjoy those services with their neighborhood friends. So that's the piece that's referring to the Johnson Irish situation, that we stopped the busing from that standpoint.
Okay, and then a question that I would have is, if there are special programs at Putnam and Irish and Lincoln, and those schools were closed, if they were, would those same programs be available in their new schools?
That's something we're looking at and analyzing in regard to the whole idea of coming up with a recommendation for the Board of Education.
Okay.
So there's no decisions made at this point in time.
Right, I understand that. It just seems to me that if they didn't all go to the same school, then you might be duplicating those different programs in 5 different schools instead of having them in one school.
And
is that a fair analysis or not?
Well, if I can say one more piece around that, within the board resolution, they outlined for the district that we want to make sure that we're retaining or enhancing educational programs. So that'll be one of the considerations that we look at as we make a recommendation to the board.
Okay, John?
Okay, first I want to say that it's important to note that this, like with those Johnson kids that got moved around going on their 3rd school this year, is they were taken out of a bilingual program that has a very culturally competent staff and the ability to teach that population with those at-risk needs. And it's very important to understand, if you looked at achievement and you looked at busing kids past other schools, we have the district busing kids from all over the district to some schools. So that's not a concern in all cases if they're districtly supported. But the key there is, if we were looking at achievement, we've looked at those kids. We've had their parents come to us and tell us what's happening. They're falling off because ELA is a subtractive model. It's to get kids out of their native language in 3 years. And so you're not teaching them as well as a bilingual program can. When you teach someone in their primary language, it's proven time and time again as one of the best. So what I'd like to pull up is the map results for Poudre School District versus Irish, for example, grades 2, 3, and 4. Irish 88%, the district 83. Irish 95%, the district 85. Grade 4, 93 and 83. If you looked at performance and you were doing what was best for these kids, you wouldn't have taken them out of the highest performing school that you have and put them in a school that couldn't handle them, and now they're having to send them off to Olander to see if Olander can do a better job with it.
Actually, no, that's not the case. It's Olander is also has an ELA program as well, just to serve the students in their neighborhood.
Okay, very good. Now, I think someone has already brought up what you call wraparound programs. Just a minute, I'll go through that. And I think, what other ways would the district look at utilizing the schools? Can you sell the schools to make money?
Well, actually, I know that there's, we have the Washington site right now that's been up for sale. So we did close one school technically. Now the lab school was in there and they moved to the Moore building. But that facility is for sale at this point in time. And I know there's negotiations going on regarding that.
Okay.
So that is one option.
Okay, and could any of these schools be sold, or are there state laws that say they can't be? Anybody know that?
No, I don't think there's any state laws that says they can't be, since they are district property, and they can be repurposed.
And what are the other possibilities?
And, in terms of what the schools could be used for, or alternatives
or
to closing
wraparound
schools.
programs. I think that's what you called them.
Well, certainly we would want to see an increase, if we can, in wraparound programs, because what that involves is, first of all, an awareness of community need, and then secondly, an intergovernmental or agency commitment. And I think that is an area that is fruitful for exploration, and I'd like to begin those conversations. So we recognize, as I think this forum, or this discussion tonight, is that we are all in this together, and that no one has individual right answers, and that we can benefit from not only suggestions that are made by this crowd, but certainly by a greater awareness and interacting with those agencies.
Yes, and it directly addresses this issue of wraparound services. If you listen to Arnie Duncan, any of his interviews lately, he talks about how we are doing some of the worst, the United States is doing the worst job of educating poor students relative to other countries at similar socioeconomic levels, and even compared to poor countries, that poverty in the United States really is an impediment to a proper education. And so if you listen to his vision is of community schools that would be wraparound sites, that would be community center sites. I would argue that Irish and Putnam already are this. And so, you know, if we look even at the Katie report that was recently put out, these schools have been reported as doing a better job than other district schools in meeting the needs of historically disadvantaged, underserved students. They're already doing this. They're innovative, inspiring programs. So the resolution indicates that high quality education should be retained. How can you justify closing these schools that are already doing what is considered a national vision for education in this country?
I think it is really important to say is that, first of all, I would caution people about making assumptions that decisions have already been made, because they haven't. And if you look at the resolution itself, it uses the word may involve closing some schools, and I think you know, certainly as we go through the process, I have not made up my mind on this, and I know that other board members too are letting the process play out, and that they'll make any decisions with deliberation.
Okay, any other comments?
I'd like to comment on the wraparound services, such as what the 21st Century Grants provide. It's after school primarily. You see kids staying in school until 4:30, and so that's part of the reason we're seeing some of the great gains that we see at the schools. And the grant expanded to Putnam and Lincoln this last year. And the Spanish lessons, the English lessons, life skills, the homework assistance, all that, and besides the fact that you're keeping these kids from being sit at home alone. But the real key there is that we can do this. We just have to replace that $2.3 million grant that we're going to throw out if we close these schools. It can be done. It's just money.
Okay. And what about using these for adult education? Is that a possibility as well, or are we doing that now?
We are doing that now at Irish. That's part of what I was saying. We have, if you come to Irish, and it doesn't matter whether your kids go there, but being we do serve that population quite well, there are classes. For example, I've taken Spanish classes, and at the same time, there's an English class going on. And a couple times during the year, we get together and we try to converse in one of the other's primary language. And that's where we tie it all together. Sort of what Tom was talking about, of trying to have the whole community. We bring them in as children. We keep them there throughout the day. We keep them later than most schools. And then the parents come in to do after-school programs as well. And that's what brings the community in. That's what keeps them working. And that's what really keeps them accelerating and succeeding. Because as you know, when a parent's involved in a school, it makes a tremendous difference in the children. And that's the whole purpose of it.
Okay.
In our innovation and efficiencies plans, we have a list of some idea starters around some partnerships and creative ways to support students, but also families. And I think it's the idea around, we're not just talking about wraparound services for students, but how can we embrace communities and support families around their needs as well. But partly, I think a lot of this also relates to this just can't rely on the district alone to provide. It has to be either through grants, and sometimes we know that that's soft money in some cases, but also there has to be partnerships and a community that really embraces this together with the school district.
Okay. And what about, we have adult education at some of the schools
We do.
Too?
Yeah, absolutely. And John talked about that, particularly at Irish, but we do have programs that we actually share some space with Front Range Community College, and they come in and do some classes, GED classes, English language acquisition classes, things of that nature. And I think that we're looking at how do we expand those kinds of opportunities for our students and families, absolutely. And that's the whole purpose behind the innovation and efficiencies plans, is to spur on more of that thinking and more of those opportunities.
Okay, any other comments? Jana?
Well, I think one of the unfortunate things about the process that could actually be changed at any point in time would be to ask all schools to do the innovation efficiency plans. There's no reason for them not to. And the fact is that the administration and the board and the community are all learning things about all of these schools that they didn't know before, because there was no comprehensive place where all the information sat. What are each school doing with their kids and their parents, and what are the needs, and how are they using those schools? There was nothing comprehensive, and now you're getting it from a lot of schools, but everybody ought to be doing it. And if everybody was doing it, it might be, let's everybody do the efficiency and innovation plans, and then after that's done, okay, did that work or did that not work with the budget issues that the district is facing? Then you could talk about possible closures if that were necessary on a holistic view and a strategic view. But right now, with the pockets in town that have been chosen for doing the few closure consolidation plans, that's at the top of everybody's mind. That's what people can't get past, when the efficiency plans are really the most important thing.
As a professor at CSU, I have many opportunities to speak with my students who come from northern Colorado schools, South Denver, as well as South Fort Collins. I find from them in personal conversations that many of them who are Latina or Latino students or low income, they feel that they do not get equal opportunities for proper counseling. There are oftentimes many culturally insensitive statements that are made to them. Here, as a parent of a student who came through the Poudre School District and am familiar with many people on the north side, I am oftentimes petitioned to intervene on their behalf because of insensitive things that are done here in this school district. And so I'd like to offer a challenge to Dr. Hahn regarding his statement that you can just simply bus these kids over to another school where perhaps there aren't the kinds of services that have already been described here in this meeting. How do you think that to make a statement, well, there are very competent teachers in these other schools, they can take care of the matter? How can we just simply state that when we have evidence, and this is part of the literature as well if we do our research, that there's an issue of cultural competency as well as perceptions and stereotypes that are very common that are still being perpetrated against particular categories of students.
And thank you for bringing that forward. I know that that's a topic that we're committed to addressing and talking about within PSD, and just talking more about how do we support all of us to be more culturally sensitive and competent, and we have amazing staff, as you well know, within PSD who are well-versed and very knowledgeable in those areas, and how do we learn from one and with each other around those issues. And it's a topic that's very dear to my heart as well, that we have schools that work for all kids, absolutely.
Yes, Tom.
Yeah, and just as a follow-up too, thank you, sir, for bringing that question. It has to do with a belief in high expectations that every kid be provided an opportunity to learn at the highest level possible. The idea of equal opportunity is crucial, and one of the things that you mentioned that often happens with institutions, and that is proper counseling. I had an opportunity last week to hear the outgoing Commissioner of Education, Dwight Jones, who talked about growing up as an African American in Kansas, where his father was actually a landowner, and the discrimination that he faced not only as a family but as a minority in those school systems, where he was actually told by a counselor that he needs to go to this other room, and that he was just trying to get out of class when he went to try and listen to what college opportunities were going to be available. He overcame that, but spoke very dramatically about that sensitivity and realization, and not labeling children, and giving them proper counseling so they can take advantage of all their opportunities.
Okay, what about closing comments? Do you have any special things you would like to tell our audience tonight? Why don't we start with Jana?
One of the reasons this topic has come up is because of the financial situation of our state. And until that gets addressed, every single district in this state is going through these exact same conversations. Everybody, from the smallest to the biggest, from those who have only 46 kids in their district, and a family is moving out and they might be down to 30. What are they going to do? To the biggest ones who have a lot of extra spaces, more than we do. So this is a societal issue for the state of Colorado. But getting down to Fort Collins and Poudre School District, I still believe that outlying areas can be a whole lot more efficient than they are. I believe some of them have talked about going to 4-day weeks, and I think all the outlying communities and the mountain schools could easily do that and save a lot of money. It'd be a good efficiency plan.
I'm going to have to cut you off because we're running out of time. Quick one from Tom.
Just a quick one, too, as someone who is eventually going to have to cast a vote in this area. This is a responsibility I embrace and will not shy away from. I take this work seriously. I continue to do extensive work and listen to all perspectives, and I will continue to do that carefully and respectfully.
Okay, Kevin?
I think just lastly, we're committed to being great stewards of public money and doing a great job of educating all students in PSD. And I just want to thank the staffs and the principals and parents who have been involved in the closure consolidation plans as well as the innovation and efficiencies plans. It's been a lot of time, a lot of work, a lot of great thinking has come out of this, as Jana was referring to. But I just want to thank them for all their hard work on top of all the duties that they have of educating kids every day.
Okay, John.
And the one thing that I think that hasn't been really thrown out there is there's some of the things that we've tried to put out that we've done, such as furlough days to save money. We've got several hundred acres that are sitting out there unused for proposed future development But based on the capacity numbers that the school board provides, we should be good for the next 30-plus years. You know, we could sell some of those. There's other options. The bottom line, what hasn't been put out there, I think, to everybody, is the only calculated savings are truly based on laying teachers off, going from an average of 20 students per class to 25, and that's the bottom line, and that's scary to me, is to start increasing class size in this district as a simple matter of just simply to save money and not educate every kid every day. And if I was on the board, I wish I'd get Janet Lay back on the board, because I agree with her. You know, we need to stop this process, take a look at what our innovations are before we keep talking about closing schools, because it's going to become a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Okay, thank you very much. And to our studio and viewing audience, thank you very much for your questions.
Thank you.
Thank you.